you and I, well, you are a new entrant, and I was. And I remember, going into farming when I was in my teens. Here I am now in my 60s, and still feel like a new entrant. How about you? Because you just come into this, haven't you?
Yeah, so I'm an intern here at FarmEd, and I've been here for 2 months now, and I've actually come from a slightly different background. So I'm not into agriculture at all before this. I actually was trained in zoology, um, and I studied at the University of Exeter, did an undergraduate degree there, and then followed on and did a master's by research in tropical ecology and conservation. So yeah, my area of speciality was quite, I suppose,
Mm,
far-reaching across
mm.
the world, knowing more about tropical ecology than the ecology in my own country at one point.
That's weird, isn't it? I mean, don't you
Yeah,
think, like it's like, you know more about some another part of the world, but you live, in here, working abroad effectively.
exactly. Yeah, and that was kind of the switch that flicked in my head and started making me think. I feel like I definitely need to know more about what's in my backyard than what's 6,000 miles away.
Yeah.
So that kind of got me thinking about, I guess, the whole picture of agroecology in this country. And my passion really is lying with nature and conservation. That's why I kind of started my journey doing a zoology degree. So I've kind of married that passion with what is the majority of the land use in this country, which is farming. So, how can we improve nature and still produce as much food as possible for the
Is
needs
that
of this
possible?
country?
Because a lot of us, people of my generation have been trained to produce a lot of food off, as you say, most of the land. And, we love the natural world, of course we do, but there is this pressure building, I feel, for somehow working alongside the natural world more than perhaps we have in the past. Do you see that as a possibility in the future, in your future? I mean, is that one of the drivers to see how the two things might work alongside each other rather than, antagonistically?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it has to because we can't keep going forward using quite, industrialized farming techniques because it's just not sustainable. And we don't really want to sustain what is going on in the farmed environment at the moment because it's just depleting nature. And without nature, we won't have the resources on the land to be able to produce our own food. So I think we don't really have an alternative now, and people are starting to wake up and see that and start making changes for the better that benefit us all.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't disagree. I think it's a finite resource. We can't keep depleting. Well, soil. It's for me, it's soils. And if you deplete that, the natural capital of soils that's taken, thousand millions of years to build, how do you rebuild that in our lifetimes? Well, you can't. You have to, stop where we are and rebuild. And I think we're well aware of the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and so on. Some of that, of course, is from agriculture. So it's a difficult challenge. I mean, you feel like you can make a difference, obviously. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it. It's just tell us what to you agroecology means, because it's a horrible word. I hate it. I mean, farming is what I sort of think of when I think of growing food on the land. But agroecology and regenerative farming, these are terms that have come in. Did that excite you when you first heard about them, or do you think they're just technical terms that always have to be explained to people?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started getting into, I guess we can call it generally agriculture, I definitely didn't know what a lot of this terminology was because my training was in zoology and conservation and nothing to do with agriculture. So I felt almost a little bit intimidated by all of this terminology. But as I kind of slowly started to educate myself and get more involved in kind of agroecological networks, then it all started becoming a lot more clear. And yes, there are a lot of buzzwords, and sometimes it can be difficult to distinguish what the difference is. But for me, the broad concept of agroecology is working with nature, with people as well, local communities, to produce food in a self-sustaining way, essentially. And that is, we're talking about self-sustaining in terms of ecology, but also the social aspects as well, because we're seeing a real kind of crisis in communities at the moment in rural communities, whether that's, economically or with mental health as well. Farming has one of the highest suicide rates of all professions. So that is a really important aspect for me as well when we're thinking about agroecology. And I know there's about 10 principles of regenerative agriculture, and that is one of them. It's the social and economic values tied to how we actually work with nature to produce the food as well.
Yeah, I think farmers have lost a sense of community. I think we've probably as a society lost the value in farmers, and I think there aren't many of farmers around. They're just, the numbers are so small now in comparison to what they would have been perhaps only 2 generations ago. Pillars of the rural community, and still could be, I think, by the way. But I think it's all about the people, isn't it? It's about having enough people to sort of form a crowd of people that can produce food and also support each other. Because as you say, people are really isolated. Many farmers don't see people day to day because they're farming, and there aren't that many people in the landscape. When I was younger, your age, there was dozens of us on every farm, literally. Now there's a handful, and if you're lucky, so it's really different. How do you feel about growing? Do you see where do you see the future in growing from your perspective? Obviously some big fields, but you're a new entrant, so you're like me. How do you access land is a big question, isn't it? Where do you see where's the gate that you can push on and it'll open? How do you get into it?
Yeah, so I actually read a really interesting fact in a book today, and it was 3% of people who are farming in the UK are below 35.
3%?
Yeah.
Blimey.
So that was, I knew it was low, but that was really shocking to me. I wouldn't call myself a farmer, but I am someone who's below 35 looking to forge my career in the broad term of agroecology. And I like to be optimistic about what change is going to happen over the next couple of decades, because I think a lot of change is going to come, and it has to come. And I think it has to come from young people as well. Something I'm particularly passionate about is ensuring that traditional farming and small-scale farming practices and the knowledge of that is passed down, because the way I see it is that my grandparents' generation definitely had this knowledge of, the more, what I'd consider the more sustainable techniques of small-scale farming, mixed farming.
So cultural techniques as opposed to the industrial
knowledge.
ones. Yeah.
Yeah, and then whereas my parents' generations in the 70s was very industrialised, mechanical, large-scale farms, less of the mixed farming. So for me, it's very important first that we preserve that knowledge and the cultural traditions, and that's passed down to kind of my generation and next generations. And a great way of doing that, I think, is kind of another buzz term at the moment. It's kind of joint ventures and enterprise stacking. So this is when you may have a farm that's a couple of 100 acres, and as a lot of us know, at the moment, the average age of a farmer is around 60, 65. So a lot of people are finding it quite hard to cope with the amount of land that they have to farm for their livelihood at the moment. And, I've spoken to lots of people coming through FarmEd in the last couple of months who are really interested in having younger people come onto the farm and kind of, I guess, reinvigorate enterprises. Whether that's having a section of their farm would be ideal for, say, a horticultural enterprise or a market garden. But they can't do that themselves because it's very labour intensive.
You're talking about me, you realise?
No, not quite.
You are. No, but you are literally talking about me in the sense of, it's a farm. This farm here was, there were no young people coming onto the farm, and when I came to come here to farm, I'm your average age farmer. But I was, and now, as we've seen on this farm, there's lots of opportunities for new entrants, old and young. And I think you're right. I think there is a way in. I think farmers, where they can, are generally quite positive. But of course, there's also the bigger farming, and farmers have got bigger, which has meant more mechanisation, of course, and bigger scales, and that has meant less people. So on the one hand, farming is being pressured to become more efficient, and it has become more efficient, and that's meant less people on the land, which I think is definitely the case. But I think you're right. There's another dimension to this, isn't there, which we've I wouldn't say we've lost or that's missing, but it's not beyond the wit of all of us to create opportunities for new entrants like you and me into the farmed landscape. And I think that would be a very positive thing. But you've got to find ways of doing it. And so how do you do that? When you having a year here, I know at Farm Ed, and how do you vision your sort of, in 5 years' time, could you be growing food on the land?
Yeah, I think the major challenge for new entrants, whether old or young, is the capital to set up your own, well, whether that be farm or market garden or whatever. Land is expensive, and most people in the current climate don't have the capital to purchase a lot of land to do that kind of thing. So you're probably looking down the route of enterprise stacking or tenant farming or shared farming or something like that, which actually provide really lovely opportunities, I think, because it is going to increase collaboration in farming again. Like you say, there's been a rise of the big, large-scale farms, sometimes thousands and thousands of acres, whereas that's a really lonely profession. Yeah, okay, you might have a few staff to support you on that, but you don't really have the diversity of people on those farms necessarily. Whereas if you're a farmer looking to diversify what you're doing, but you can't necessarily manage all that land yourself, and you offer the land out to other people, whether that's renting or by any other means, you're encouraging a lot of new energy and kind of enthusiasm onto the land, new ideas, which is really, really invaluable. So you've got the experience of people who have been doing it for multiple years and a bit older, and the energy and ideas and enthusiasm of young people coming on that may want to start a new enterprise. So for myself, something I'm really interested in at the moment is market gardening, purely because I was one of those probably hundreds of people in COVID who got into growing veg in their garden. And I found it incredibly, I think the word is fulfilling in every way. COVID was a difficult time for everyone, and we all were looking for connection and things to do with our time. And for me, it was a very therapeutic process to grow veg. And once restrictions lifted a bit and you could get out of your own house, it provided that connection to people for me, because I found a community garden project, which basically changed my life, because that's why I'm here at Farm Ed now, really, is because I found this community project, and there were so many other people involved, from age 3 to 73, and it was just so easy to connect with them because we were all a part of a collective doing something together, working together to grow food, and it was just the most, like I said, fulfilling activity to do socially, physically, mentally. And I think if you can fulfill yourself in those three things, then that's life, right? It's a great way to live. So
the key question for me is going to be, can you make a living at it?
Yeah.
I noticed you spend a lot of time on the kitchen garden here, which is 5 acres, so there's quite a lot of food coming off that, and employs 4 or 5 people. And I've seen you really enjoy that, and I get it completely, because there's a buzz around the place, and you share all sorts of life, death, story, everything about life goes on there, I know. And it's great for the farm because it brings a lot of people here. So I've seen the benefit of that, and as you say, that enterprise stacking is really powerful. But you do need a few acres of land and the associated polytunnels and deer fence and that sort of thing, which is capital. Like you said, it's the money, isn't it? But there is, I've noticed, I don't know whether you have experienced this with your horticultural production before and here, but there is money there, because it's much higher value than, say, arable crops or milk or whatever it might be that we're producing on most of our agricultural land. But you're going to need it. A new entrant, you can't, you can't live on thin air. You need some money. And do you see a future where you can earn enough money and, of course, have those other values satisfied, quality of life and enjoying your work, etc.? Do you think the money's there?
Yeah, I think we all know that farming is not a profession to get into to get rich quick.
That's true.
True. And we could be very open about that. It's a vocation rather than a profession, I would say. and people do it because they love it.
You're paid in other ways.
Well, there's that aspect too, you know, but I definitely think you can make enough money to live a comfortable life. You know, we can see it in action here at FarmEd. Lots of people are doing it. And yeah, I don't think people should be put off by the financial aspects of it. You know, there's plentiful examples across the country of people setting up enterprises. You know, people perhaps a little bit like me who just want to slightly change their career path and get into it, and they are making, you know, they're making an annual salary off it. So that definitely doesn't put me off. And I think you just have to be a bit innovative about it. You know, the farming system is changing so much, and we have to kind of keep up with that and keep a little bit ahead of the game in terms of how we can maximise, I guess, the kind of finances we can put into what we're doing. So, you know, looking for grants and things like that would support you. Like, I've heard of people getting grants to build polytunnels or getting second-hand polytunnels from other places that don't need them anymore. So instead of just thinking, okay, I need 3 polytunnels for my market garden and buying them off some retailer, that's going to cost you full price. You can just think a bit outside the box, look at grants, look at second-hand. There are ways to make that initial expenditure cheaper as well.
So what would your where are the barriers then? So obviously you need some money to start with. You need some equipment and polytunnels or small tractor, whatever. But are they the biggest barriers, or do you think it? How do you actually do? If you were going to, you know, when you go out and say, right, we're going to start a business. You know, whoever we is, it might be you and somebody else or whatever, the team. But what's the biggest barrier?
I guess one of the barriers for me that I found, which was a factor in my kind of leap of faith in changing from my career in tropical conservation to agroecology in this country, was, well, I suppose I could say it was the knowledge, I suppose. Yeah, it's that feeling of, oh, I wasn't trained in agriculture, I don't have a family farm, I didn't go to agricultural college. Am I good enough for this kind of thing? And that feeling of, I guess, a bit of imposter syndrome when you're like, well, you think, you know, there's so much farming going on in this country, but I know nothing about it. Who am I to go and start up my own thing?
That's a natural feeling. I've had that all my working time, actually, because I'm not a farmer as such. Certainly wasn't from a farming background, but have spent my life working. I still feel, I think imposter syndrome for me is too much now, but I do feel I'm still new to it, you know, and I'm working hard to find my place, you know, which, but I mean, I find it really fulfilling. I agree with you entirely. It is a vocation. It's so much more interesting than I'd ever imagined it would be. When I started, I was, you know, scraping the pennies together just to pay the bills, you know, and have been for a lot of the time. But having said that, you know, I've made a career out of it, and I've known a lot of other people that have too, and they aren't just farmers. They're people that work within agriculture and horticulture who support each other. And it's been an amazing 40 years. And I would highly recommend it to others. So I'm not at all surprised to see you're keen to have a change from zoology and conservation, whatever that is, because these are terms that I'm not familiar with, of course. So agroecology and regenerative farming might be more familiar to me, but I feel like we're going through a big change, aren't we? In, you know, the way we value things, and we're moving perhaps away from, although some would say that we still retain that capitalist approach, but other values right alongside that now are as important. So obviously, you know, working alongside the natural world and the climate emergency are big issues for not just my generation, but for generations to follow. And I'm really positive and optimistic we can change it, but I think we need people. I think, you know, tens of thousands of people like you and I and others, you know, interested in this space are going to be necessary. And it's like mobilising an army of people who are interested in growing food in a regenerative, you know, way. And that's exciting. And so I think you're going to a great place and space. And I think I'm so glad you're here. So I think you bring a lot of clarity and good thinking to this space. So I think you're going to have a great time, and good luck. And I think we're running out of time, so we're going to have to wind up. I know.
Oh, well, let me just say thank you very much for having me here. You know, it's been one of the best decisions of my life, I think, to decide to get into agroecology and come to Farm Ed to learn.
You won't be saying that in the winter when it's pouring with rain and cold.
Yeah, I know, but I'm ready for it.
Yeah, you got a good coat.
Yeah.
A pair of wellies will be fine. What could possibly go wrong?
We'll be fine. Embrace it, that's what I say.
Absolutely. Abi, thanks very much. Good
Thanks,
stuff.
Ian.
Yeah, see you in a bit.
See you.